California Democrats. This is Rusty Hicks, chair of the California Democratic Party. Thank you for the opportunity to send you warm greetings and well wishes. For all those at the Pasadena United Democratic Headquarters, thank you. Thank you for the work that you have already done. Thank you for the work that you will do. On Labor Day, we come together to celebrate the dignity of work, the dignity of all work. We also celebrate the work of the labor movement, which is the fight to improve the lives of workers through collective action, through a collective voice on the job. I've been proud to be in the trenches of the labor movement with so many incredible leaders, much led by my leader, Maria Elena DeRazo, now Senator DeRazo, and certainly grateful to have worked alongside her at the LA County Federation of Labor. But we know that workers have the opportunity to have that collective voice through their vote to join a union, something that should be a right for all workers. Their voice is their vote. And in 60 days, we've got the opportunity to take the lead of the labor movement and ensure that we have collective action and collective voice when we take back our country on November 3rd. The fact that we are dealing with a pandemic on top of a pandemic on top of a pandemic means that we need real lasting change in this country. And I believe that with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we've got the ticket to help lead the way, to not only make a change in the White House, but also take back the U.S. Senate and get rid of Moscow Mitch McConnell, to keep the House in the hands of Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But not just to win on the national level, to win here in the state, important legislative races, important congressional races, but to also win on the local level as well. And yet we see Suppression 2020 is a very real thing. It's often been said that they wouldn't fight so hard to keep you from voting if it wasn't that important. We know that we have been here before. We've felt voter suppression before. We've seen voter suppression before, and we have overcome that voter suppression before. So 2020 is going to be no different. They're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at us to try to prevent us from casting a vote, being at the ballot box. And we know that we're going to have to tell our friends, our family, our coworkers, our neighbors, anybody and everybody to make a plan to vote and make sure that you do, in fact, vote. So I look forward to working with each and every one of you over the course of the next 60 plus days to ensure that every voice is heard and that we collectively improve the lives of all Californians, of all Americans. Let's go get them, Democrats. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Los Angeles County Supervisor Hildale Solis, and I want to wish you all a very happy Labor Day. This upcoming election is so important, and as former Secretary of Labor to President Obama, I want to speak directly to the workers about why they need to continue making their voices heard. It is often the labor movement that is at the forefront of positive change, improving our quality of life, protecting our health, and uniting together for our communities that face inequities. For generations, workers have fought for good jobs, fair treatment, and wages, and a seat at the bargaining table. It is our workers who have sustained the economic security of America's vital middle class, and it is our workers who will fight to vote. Restoring dignity in our economy requires a vote at the ballot box. That is why this Labor Day, I'm urging our labor brothers and sisters to make a plan, to vote, to encourage others to vote, and to fight back against any voter suppression. Here in Los Angeles County, we're making voting more accessible. Every registered voter will receive a vote by mail ballot. Exercising the right to vote should not come at the expense of one's health during this health pandemic. Too often, our workers are already having to put their lives on the line for their community. That's why there will be over 300 drop boxes throughout Los Angeles County where you can drop off your vote by mail ballot, in addition to being able to mail it through the United Postal Service. Please visit lavote.net today to register to vote. This year is the ballot that reflects a referendum on our values, and this Labor Day, the call to action is no different. We need workers to join together to fight for change. So again, thank you and happy Labor Day.
Hello, Pasadena Democrats. I'm State Senator Maria Elena Durazo, representing Los Angeles and East LA. I truly hope that all of you are safe and sound and healthy with your loved ones. We are living in dangerous times. The pillars of our democracy are under attack by a president and administration whose sole purpose is to take away our constitutional rights for their own political gain. We have witnessed time and time again efforts to cut down voting in specific communities where primarily African Americans, Latinos, and New Americans live. Across the US, Republicans are passing measures making it harder to cast a ballot. The Democrats are passing laws to make it easier and safer to vote. Republicans want to manipulate their political outcomes that do not reflect the will of the people. Voter ID laws that make it harder for our seniors, cutting down the days for early voting, mass purges of voter rolls. 7 states have strict photo ID laws where voters must present a government-issued photo ID in order to cast a regular ballot. The problem is that over 21 million US citizens do not have government-issued photo identification. The Trump administration has already set out to stop vote by mail this November election because he knows when all citizens vote, his re-election is jeopardized. The Postmaster General, a major Trump supporter, has cut the US Postal Service budget and started removing mailboxes in many parts of this country. States often use the purge process as a method of illegally removing eligible voters. A single purge can stop up to hundreds of thousands of people from voting. This Labor Day, we remind ourselves of courageous Latino immigrant labor leaders who pushed back against exploitation and racism, the Filipino grape strike, the UAW Chicano leaders, Bert Corona and Chole Alatorre, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and the change in California over the past 25 years because janitors and housekeepers led the labor and political movements. August 29th, we marked the 50th anniversary of the anti-war civil rights Chicano moratorium. This year, however, we lost a giant in the social and racial justice movement, John Lewis. He was a staunch advocate for voting rights and labor rights for everyone in this country. Pasadena Democrats, you want $15 minimum wage long before the state, and you want fair recall rights for laid off hospitality workers and janitors long before the state. Way to go. Our single-minded mission has to be to take Trump out of the White House and start the rebirth of our nation. Happy Labor Day.
How will I be able to vote without putting my life in danger?
The Black Lives Matter actions make voting more important than ever.
Will this health crisis become a constitutional crisis?
Am I going to be able to vote in November?
We have a historic decision today striking down a key part of the Voting Rights Act, a civil rights law passed back in 1965.
The Supreme Court essentially said racism is over, and these communities don't need to pre-clear these changes anymore.
This decision leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
It let the dogs out. It let these racially discriminatory voting laws to just run wild.
Within hours of the Voting Rights Act being gutted, Texas had a new strict photo ID law. And within days, Alabama announced its own repressive voter ID law.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
200,000 more people would have voted in Wisconsin if not for their strict voter ID law.
Voter purges have become rampant. Since the 2016 election, states have removed almost 17 million voters nationwide.
You describe Georgia as the epicenter of the current voter suppression battle. What has earned Georgia that distinction?
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood, they're eating the wood away, and you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomaston, Georgia, Upson County. And I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion. I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what? Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money. First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor
on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
No, I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was on a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black side had to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem there.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
Got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on Election Day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls means.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the polls we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters, because if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000. They had no idea they could vote.
Other states use the same
over who's been removed from
voting.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already won for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick, and I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at a U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. She admitted that yes, they did mess up, it was their fault, but there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late, it's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee, was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections, and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, "Oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about." 40 cases, not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour. The line is running out.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do.
The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. and then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long, through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door, that's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now, the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID.
Wow.
So she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about like
4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drives on campus, within the community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not gonna be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. So little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote and then you get there and the experience is just terrible and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know now? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote. It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
Have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, #StayInLine.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see, there was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Georgia 2018 was a case study of voter suppression. And as we approach the 2020 elections, we're seeing a coordinated effort to suppress, from lawyers, millions of dollars, and potentially the biggest tool of all, the coronavirus.
The coronavirus pandemic is creating concerns ahead of the 2020 election. With no official end in sight to the crisis, there are questions about whether voters will be able to head to the polls to cast their ballot in November.
Out of a large city of Milwaukee, we almost got 600,000 people in the city limits. They only have 5 polling sites open during a pandemic.
In Wisconsin today, thousands waiting for hours, forced to choose between protecting their own health and exercising their right to vote.
This is so wrong. This is just so wrong. Stop playing politics with our lives.
The 2020 primary in Georgia was like the 2018 election all over again.
This is primary day in Georgia. Lines in Atlanta stretching for blocks.
There were people and seniors who had been sitting out waiting to vote for more than 5 hours.
This is wrong. This is America.
I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing.
If you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
Oh, beautiful for space. We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We
We are here to resist an ID law that is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and immoral.
People are demanding democracy. New Mexico now has same-day voter registration. Iowa, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona all passed laws restoring voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. Maine has enacted automatic voter registration. Delaware and Virginia enacted early in-person voting. And in response to the coronavirus pandemic, Michigan, Illinois, New Hampshire, and California have all committed to expanding mail-in and absentee voting in the 2020 election.
We belong together. We are all part of the fabric of this country, and we understand what's at stake.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
No one should have to risk their life to vote. And for the politicians that put you in front of a coronavirus firing squad, vote them out.
From sea